Awesome. I reckon let's get started, shall we? So just like I said, welcome to everybody who's just joined us in the last minute or so and hasn't heard anything already. Welcome to the Boolean Coding Week. We're super excited to be spending this week helping you understand a little bit more about the world of coding and ultimately whether this might be something interesting for you. We'll be running all week from the 8th to the 12th of August from 5 till 7 p.m. and it's all about arcade mania. So there's some real nostalgia this week with tic-tac-toe and Space Invaders games that we're going to be building later on. I'm giving you way too many spoilers. I'm ruining all my slides, so maybe I'll get started with the slides. First of all, though, my name's Patrick. I work on the team here at Boolean, and I'm joined today by Edward and Nathan, who are two of on the teaching team here at Boolean, who are going to be running the majority of the sessions this week, who you'll get to know in due course very shortly. And maybe let you both introduce yourselves at the end of the slides, if that's all right, both.
Sounds great, Patrick.
Cool. First things first, who are we? We are Boolean, and we are an online tech academy that's actually international. We operate in Italy and the UK, and we also offer our UK course around quite a few countries in Europe as well. We run a bunch of courses from software development, front-end development, and data analytics, and it's all aimed at people who want to start a career in tech. The courses are live and online. This means you can do them from anywhere in the world, like from the comfort of your home, but they're live lessons. So it's not just one of these that you kind of click play on a tutorial and you follow it along. This is with real teachers, real people, real exercises every day. Part of what our kind of ethos is about trying to help people who are looking to start that career in tech, not just learn the skills. And so a big part of what we do is also supporting people with career support and on the job search at the end of the course. So this is a really big part of what we offer at Boolean on the full-time course. And just some very quick numbers. We've had over 2,000 students that have chosen to join Boolean since we started back in 2018. In the UK, we're seeing an average salary of around £31,000 at the moment for someone leaving the course out the other side, which is obviously a great number to be coming out the other end with. As we said, with those 2,000 students, they've happened over around 78 classes. So we've been through this time and time again, and we constantly try and improve and iterate and get better with every class that we run. And if you chose, for example, the full stack track, there is a bunch of learning that you'll do. It's actually totals just over 900 hours on that full-time full stack course. So it's a really intensive, very immersive experience where you get to cover a lot of ground in a short period of time. We're actually going to talk way more detail about all this stuff on Thursday this week from 5 till 6:30. It's going to be a slightly shorter one on Thursday. That's going to be our open day, and that's where we're going to go into real detail on the full stack software development course, which is 6 months, the front end development course, which is just 3 months, and our data analytics part-time course, which is 6 months and is delivered on evenings and weekends, so that if you have a full-time job or full-time study, that's the one that you can come along to and learn alongside your other commitments. And as we mentioned, all those courses include live online classes that has one-to-one support as well. This is really important part of what we do. The career support for 6 months after you finish, and a bunch of financing options that we've tried to make the courses as accessible as possible for people. There's a QR code there. You can also go to the events page on our website, boolean.co.uk/events, or you'll also get an email later this week because you're signed up for the coding week that will remind you about the open day on Thursday. So looking forward to seeing you all there to chat more details about our courses. But for now, let's talk about coding week and why are we doing this? Essentially, we want to break down any of the barriers that exist around the world of coding, and we want to make as many people as possible have a chance to experience what this is, what this skill is. You might have heard some of these words, some of these terms, JavaScript, HTML, all this stuff, but you've never had a chance to properly try it with, live teachers that you can kind of ask questions to, code along with, and all this kind of stuff. Part of this is also to dispel some of those myths. A lot of people might think you have to be an expert mathematician or you have to be like super analytical or something to be a coder. Some of this stuff can help for sure, there's no denying it, But there's millions of different ways you can get into coding. Millions, exaggeration. There are many different ways you can get into coding. And we've seen people from kind of all sorts of backgrounds, whether that's doctors or artists or hospitality workers or anything, have managed to come through and retrain into coding. And that's why we're so excited that, as we said at the start, over 1,000 of you have joined us today, which is really, in many ways, quite humbling. We're super excited to have so many people who want to join us today to learn to code with us. So really excited to get started this week. You're going to learn a bunch of stuff. We're going to start with some technologies, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. These are the building blocks of the web. So these will help you be able to build the 2 projects at the second half of the week, which are going to be some classic arcade games. We've got tic-tac-toe, which other people may know as noughts and crosses. I know it as noughts and crosses, actually. Didn't really know what tic-tac-toe was. I had to Google it. But apparently it's the same thing. And Space Invaders, which I think we can all agree we know what Space Invaders is. So we're really excited to have both of these projects coming up towards the end of the week. And here we go. This is the exact timetable. So today is an introduction to HTML and CSS with Edward. Edward's our head of teaching. This is going to be a little bit more of a kind of like demystify and explain some of the concepts around HTML and CSS, rather than the projects, which is going to be more of a like code along with us whilst we build this, just to help set some expectations there. Tomorrow, we're going to be doing introduction with JavaScript with Nathan, who's one of the main teachers on the course here at Boolean. On Wednesday, Nathan's going to be taking you through your first project, tic-tac-toe. On Thursday, we've got the open day, like we mentioned. We've also got one of our students that just finished a course who's going to come along and talk about his experience. So that's a great way to learn what it's like firsthand. And finally, we're going to wrap up the week with Edward taking us through Space Invaders, the new final project. All the sessions start at 5 p.m. UK time, and they run through for roughly 2 hours, apart from the open day, which will be slightly quicker. Last couple of bits from me. I think probably the most asked question this weekend: will the lessons be recorded? Yes, they will. I'm going to say this one more time. Yes, they will. You'll receive a link to the lessons. I think we're going to upload them to our YouTube channel. So we're going to share the link to the YouTube playlist with you. Each day we'll upload them. So check in sort of in the mid-afternoon of the following day, and that lesson from the day before should have finished uploading. So you'll be able to watch back anything that you've missed. If you're able to make all 4 lessons this week, so not including the open day, but the 4 kind of lessons, we have a certificate of achievement, a certificate of attendance that we'll send out to you as well. The way that we're going to measure this is we're going to share a form with you. The form is going to change each day. So please just make sure you take 2 minutes at the end of the day to fill out that form. It's a really quick one. I think there's literally 2 questions on it. So that's the way that we're going to help measure attendance. The third thing is, please feel free to get interactive. Please code along. Please jump in with questions. But also don't worry about it if you're not able to keep up. Like we said, these lessons are being recorded. This is also partly just a way for you to kind of experience and be immersed in code. So don't worry too much about having to keep up with all of it. And most important thing is have fun. Yeah, feel free to jump in with your questions. I can see a bunch of you in the Q&A section already. Ed, I think you're going to run through shortly kind of how we're going to manage questions during the sessions.
Yep.
The final part from me on this slide is, if you are hungry for more, if you realize this is the thing that's been missing out of your life forever and you're ready to take the plunge, please feel free to apply to one of our courses. We have all of our courses are starting in September. So we've got a software development and a front-end development starting at the beginning of September, and we've got a data analytics course starting at the end of September. So there's still plenty of time to jump into to one of those. And the last thing, it wouldn't be a slideshow without a plug for our socials. So please feel free to head to our YouTube, head to Instagram. We're newly on TikTok as well. Head to our TikTok, check out some of our videos, give us some love, give us some likes, give us some shares. Please check out some great content on there. We've got a bunch of interviews with previous students and all that kind of stuff, which gives you a much wider idea of who we are and what we do. I think that's probably plenty from me. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to be hanging around to help answer questions, but I'll pass over to Ed if you want to take it away.
Fantastic. Thanks, Patrick, for that introduction. Hi, everyone. We've got a number of people here, so it's lovely to see everyone. My name is Ed. I'm head of teaching here at Boolean UK, and with me is Patrick and Nathan. You've heard from Patrick. Nathan is one of our teachers here at Boolean UK. Do you want to do a very short introduction about yourself, Nathan?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ed.
Awesome.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nathan. I'm one of the main teachers here at Boolean. I deal mostly in the JavaScript style of things. You'll find out more about that tomorrow.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to that session. And then you have a following session building tic-tac-toe. And then we're going to build Space Invaders on Friday. So we've got an action-packed week for you folks. But in order to get there, we're going to start off with some HTML and CSS. I'm going to share my screen in a second. But before I do, there's a few questions already people have asked that I want to run through. At any point, please use the Q&A form to be able to let us know what's happening. If there's anything going wrong, like my microphone breaks or the internet goes down or something drastic happens. Live events always have these lovely technical glitches. So just let us know and we'll be able to resolve it. Please ask all the questions. We will get to all the questions. Sometimes we won't be able to in the session, but we will record all the questions and then make sure we follow up with you after the fact. Everyone will get, regardless of how many people actually stay for the whole session or throughout the session, everyone will get a link to the recording. And even more than that, all of the code that we use in the examples will be available for you to have a look at. So I'm about to share my screen and show you how to go find this stuff. And you can actually look back at one of our previous events that we held back in January as well, if you want to go and have a look at that. Really, if you can, stick with us. Each session is going to build throughout to the end of Friday, and Friday's the real sort of like lovely experience of building Space Invaders. Wednesday as well, you will be able to build tic-tac-toe, or as Patrick knows it, noughts and crosses. And so there's some lovely things that we'll be able to actually build together. But also keep in mind that the sessions that we're going to be running will be a little bit fast-paced, because we're going to be demonstrating all of the concepts that we need for tic-tac-toe and then Space Invaders. So what does that mean? How is that going to impact you? You'll get the recording. So don't feel like you need to keep up during the sessions, because you'll be able to get the recording, watch it back, half the speed, double the speed, pause, rewind, stop, all the things that you need to do. And you'll have the example code that will show you how to go get it, all right? So the main point of this is for us to show you and demystify the things to be able to build the two games that we have, the tic-tac-toe and Space Invaders. So let's get started. A few more questions here. In terms of software, there's nothing you need to install. If you already have experience in local development, you can grab your local tools and set up your editor, set up your a browser to be able to look at the code that you write. But I'll show you a tool that you can use instead. It's all browser-based, so you don't need to install anything. And we're not going to go through the installation process for tools during this week. It'll just get in the way. So option number one is do your own thing. Option number two, just sit back, watch and enjoy and just get a sense of how things work. Option three is you can work in Code Sandbox, which is a tool that I'll show you very shortly. We'll pause for questions at the end, but I think that's probably what I'm going to start off with, and then I'm going to share my screen. So, one moment. Okay, I am now sharing my screen. So you should be able to see this lovely blue background with the Boolean logo. I'm going to share this URL in the chat function, so you should be able to see it. We have disabled it, but you should still be able to access it when I send it to you. We'll also follow up with this link to everyone. This link brings you to this page that you see before you, and we have a couple coding events that we've already ran, the one back in January and the one we're running right now. If you click on this link, here are the 4 sessions that we'll be running this week, the coding sessions, and we're going to start off with HTML CSS. So here are all the things that we're going to do over the next couple of hours to be able to demonstrate the different topics that you need to be able to get to building tic-tac-toe. and then later Space Invaders. So you'll have this link. This is where we'll also add the links to recordings. We'll also follow up with an email that you'll be able to get. So this is be able to be your source of truth for all the things for these events. And you also can go back and have a look at the previous things that we've done back in January for these free events. So everything should be here. We're going to start, and the way that I want to start is by sort of introducing two languages, HTML and CSS. These form the basis of all the things that you see currently in the browser. Anytime you open a browser and you'll see some lovely website page that is going to be built using some kind of HTML and CSS. And so we're going to start there, and then we're going to add some behavior to it tomorrow, thinking about how we can manipulate it using JavaScript. And then we'll get to a point on Wednesday where you'll be able to build something like this, some kind of tic-tac-toe game where you can play in your browser and experience it and share the link with your friends and things like that. See if I can actually win the game. Cool, look at that, fantastic. So this is what we'll be doing on Wednesday, and then we'll have an example for you on Friday. If you want to follow along and code along, the best way to do this is to open up your browser and go to a URL called Code Sandbox, like this. Oh, got capitals. If you go to just throw Code Sandbox into your search bar at the top of your page and go to that first link, that's codesandbox.io. This is probably going to be the easiest way to follow along if you want to. Again, it's not the intention that everyone should be, because we've got a lot of people on this call. But if you want to follow along and play around with it, you can sign yourself into it, create an account, and then create a new sandbox. Choose the first option here, and then you'll get some kind of editor that will write some code into, and you'll see it on the right-hand side. So this is probably the easiest way without installing any tools. If you've never done any writing of HTML and CSS before, it's probably the easiest way to do this. Again, if you want to watch this back, take your time, read through the URLs and just pause it and have a look and then build it yourself. You can do that. Anytime you change some text here, hello world, let's do an example, and then you save it, you'll see it on the right hand side. So we'll be able to manipulate the text like this. So Code Sandbox is probably the easiest tool if you want to have a look, or you can do it locally in your own editor, and that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to actually close these tab windows and open up my local editor. You can use any editor that you want. That's pretty much it. So the first thing that I want to do is talk about HTML. And the way that I'm going to do this is by showing you how this looks when you open up our browser. So if I'm just going to open this file, this is currently what my browser sees, this lovely white page. Because there's nothing inside of this part here called the body. So in order to understand HTML as a language, HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. We don't really need to know that, all right? But what it is, its purpose, is to be able to essentially encode information about what content we're using. And back about 40, 50 years ago, a well-known person, you might know the name, Sir Tim Berners-Lee, created one of the founders of the World Wide Web, created a way to be able to access documentation, his research in remote locations. He networked a couple of computers together and then needed to find a way to encode the research in literally files of paper and created a language called HTML to be able to do that. As such, we have a lot of familiar words and jargon that borrows from like documentation and research paper, like the head of a document, the body of a document, headings and paragraphs and titles. These are all things that borrow from that domain and still stick around to this day. Every web page that you see currently, this one's empty, it can be described as an HTML page that has one head, one body. And the body part here is what we use to write elements into that are going to be displayed in this little white box here in your browser. Anything in the head up here, we don't use to show to the user in the web page. Everything in the body is what we use. So one of our first HTML elements that we can write together is the heading element. And it could look something like this. I'm going to zoom in a little bit to make sure that we can see this. Now, a few things we've got to know. First of all, the characters we're using. So the first thing here is if I write this element here, we have to be careful of a few things. One, we have to use these angle brackets in the right way. So we describe this first part here as the opening tag. So we say something like the opening, oh, my fingers are in the wrong place, opening tag. And we have a closing tag. This is how the browser knows that the content that we're going to put into this element called H1, a big heading, starts here and then ends here. All right, this is a rule for the browser to say, okay, I'm going to display it in such a way. So let's have a look at what happens here. Let's say hello world is our lovely example. If I opening tag, put some content in the middle of my element here, I now have an opening tag, some content. Those are the characters, hello, comma, space, world, exclamation mark, and a closing tag. If I save this and then get my browser to display it, I can see that content on the page. Right, my browser is a lovely, sophisticated piece of software that can do lots of things. And one of the main things it does very well is to be able to render HTML. What does that mean? Well, it looks through line by line and tries to build it on the page for you. And so it looks at the opening of these angle brackets, knows, okay, I'm going to start an H1 element, I'm going to have some content, and then I'm going to close it. And it can recognize a number of different elements. We can recognize a paragraph element. A paragraph element looks like this, where we have the letter P that represents the element for a paragraph. We can see some of the differences between a hello world as a H1 element and this is a paragraph. And so the difference between an H1 element and a paragraph element. So I refresh the page, I can see it also on the screen straight away. But you can see there's a slightly different size and a slightly different font weight. They are slightly different, and these are the inherent styles that some of these elements give. And there are lots of different elements that we can use. This is your first HTML page. All right, we've got a body that has two elements, a heading and a paragraph. And you'll see in pretty much most websites, you will have lots of text. You can think of like the BBC website that has articles with text. Those are going to be paragraph elements, maybe more than one. And you'll have headings for different articles. That's going to be some kind of heading. Most of the websites that you use with some kind of content is going to be arranged with headings and paragraphs and a number of other ones. And we're going to have a look at some of the common ones in a second. But these form essentially the foundation of all web pages HTML elements that you see. All browsers are able to support HTML and CSS, sometimes with slightly varying versions. But it's super common across all web applications. So let's have a look at the next section here, the number elements. For this one, let's have a look at a few different kinds of elements. We've got a few I want to be able to demonstrate, and I want you to be able to practice with. And we'll have a look at some of the different kinds that are available to you. Now, one of the things that you should have in your mind is as someone who maybe wants to get into designing web pages or becoming a software developer, you'll have a bunch of these tools at your disposal. Which elements do you want to use to display information to a user? And sometimes you'll choose one way, someone else might choose another way. There might be a few different ways to go about it. But these are all essentially the tools at your disposal to be able to use to show useful information to someone, right? At the end of the day, web pages are about getting some kind of interaction with your users. The next step is to show different kinds of headings. So let's have a look at an H1 heading. I'm going to do a few different headings so we can see the difference between them. There are 6 available headings in different sizes for you to have a look at. H5 and H6. We'll have actually a look what happens if we use something that's not recognized. Let's say, for example, H7, this is not recognized, not actually registered element. And we'll see what happens when the browser tries to render that. So let's put some text into these elements. Let's say this is a heading. Heading 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So we'll see whether we'll see what happens when the browser tries to display this. And in order to display this, I am going to open up this file. Okay, so you should be able to see this on my left-hand side in my browser here. We have a number of different default size for our heading elements. You can see the text slightly gets smaller, the font weight in terms of whether it's bold or not starts to reduce to the point where it actually becomes smaller than the default paragraph size. This is just the default version for an element that doesn't actually have any default behavior. So when the browser gets down to line 18 here and says, okay, I don't know what this element is, it will do its best. It's very forgiving. It doesn't like throw you any errors or whatnot. It just tries to display it as best as possible. If it doesn't recognize the name, it will just give it a default, which is nothing applied to it. So it just comes up as text. So it can be quite forgiving, which can be a problem sometimes if you are trying to investigate, what elements you're trying to use. But it's also good because it doesn't just break all your applications if you do a small little typo. Headings come in 6 different sizes. You can choose them appropriately as much as you'd like in your web pages. You can have a look at, we've already seen some paragraph elements. This is a paragraph. Sometimes you have like a large bit of text. And one way we can quickly replicate that is to be able to just use some filler text and see what happens, and how we want to be able to break a paragraph into different sections. So I'm going to create some filler text, and the way that I'm going to do that is by using some filler text here. This is just like some random text that I can just use to like fill elements out. If you want to try and do that yourself, I think you can just Google lorem ipsum. It's quite a common filler text to be able to use in applications during development. Or some editors, if you're using an editor, even in Code Sandbox, you can type lorem and just press tab and it auto-completes for you. It can be a quick way to just complete an element name or even just a text like this. There's a few other tricks like that. And we get to the end of this element section. I'm going to go through a few questions that I see popped up here, and we'll go through some questions. Demonstrating some heading elements, some paragraph elements, and then if I want to be able to see this on the page, I'm going to go back to my browser, have a look at it, and you can see it's just filled up with both bits of text here. And what I could do to sort of separate out the text here is add another element called a break element. And we can see that there's a slight change here. It just pushed everything to the next line. So there's a nice useful element here. If you want to be able to not have to create 2 different elements, paragraph elements, you can just put all the text into one, but then add a new line using this break element BR here. So again, if I remove this, it just all goes onto one line altogether until it hits the end of the page. If I use a break element, it will just go to the next line. You can see here, the alarm always begins a new line. We've got a few more elements here to have a look at. An ordered list might do what you expect it to do. What is the element name for this? The ordered list starts with an OL. So I'm going to use OL, press tab to autocomplete. And every ordered list has list items. So I'm going to create a few list items. Let's do countries. Let's say, for example, England. Commonwealth Games have been recently, so that's on my mind. Let's do, what was the order? It was actually Australia at the top. Australia, and then England, and then Canada. I think they were the top 3 in the Commonwealth Games. I might be mistaken, hopefully I'm not. This is an ordered list. What does that mean? Well, let's have a look at how the browser renders it. You can see here, there's some default numbers that come up with an ordered list, 1, 2, and 3. So if you've ever seen this out in the wild before, you'll be able to know that there's probably some kind of ordered list underneath the hood in someone writing HTML to represent that information. We can also have an unordered list. So if you don't necessarily need an ordered list, you can choose not to, and you have a slightly different list element to use. You can just use an unordered list. So let's have a look at representing the same items, but in an unordered list. You can see here, rather than the numbers, it just pops up as, by default, this little black bullet point. These are all customizable. When we get in a few minutes' time to try to change the way that the page looks using a style library called CSS, we'll be able to manipulate this as much as we want. A few more elements to have a look at. We have a button element. The button element is probably something that you've experienced a few times navigating websites. This is one of the first introductions we have to a few more additional parts to an HTML element. So let's have a look at what this looks like on the page first of all. I'm going to get rid of this part here. And add some content here. And you can see on the browser page, now that I've told my page to have a button with click me content, it has this little click me thing. It doesn't do anything. I haven't told it to do anything, and for that we probably need some JavaScript to do anything with it. But there's already an element that represents a button that is like clickable to some degree, where if I hover over it, it slightly changes its background color. And if I click on it, there's also another additional change in the way that the browser represents it. So there's a few extra things that this element can do. We have another element here called a horizontal rule. If we use it, it looks something like this, HR for horizontal rule. And it adds like this lovely little line across the page, if that's what you need. We can have a way to actually change some of the text using HTML rather than CSS. In general, we will be using CSS to manipulate our page. But if we use EM and strong, we can change text to be italic or bold. So let's have a look at both. Let's imagine that I have some paragraph with some text. Let's say I've got some filler text here. And I'm going to choose one word, let's say nostrud. I have no idea what that is. I think it's all random fake text. And I'm going to add these opening, closing tags to it. And this will take this content in between it and apply some style to it. So if I refresh the page, you can see down here that this word is now italicized. So this is what we call an inline element. It doesn't like some of the ones up here. You can see they all go down the page, left to right. Whereas this element here, the EN element, is inline. It doesn't force all the rest of the content to go beneath it on a new line. it simply stays in line. So it takes this content and it changes it, but then the paragraph continues to go to the right of it. And the same thing with the strong element. So if I say, for example, strong like this, to say I want Komodo, not like the dragon, but slightly different. We can see here that this is now also bold. And I'm slowly building one of the world's most fantastic websites, all in black and white. So these are different elements that we can use to be able to represent content on the page. Again, I think what I said a few minutes ago is the first thing you do when you're trying to build a web page is design it first, and then you write code. So you'd probably spend some time with pen and paper, drawing it out, thinking about how you want it to look like, and then choosing the right HTML elements to represent that information. Because all HTML is a markup language. It marks up content that you already have, whether it's a big title, an image, a list, other information. We take that content and then we add HTML to it. So the browser knows how to display it. And that's what we would do on the course. In our front-end course, even in our full stack development course, a lot of the work that you do is not coding. It is trying to understand requirements in the first place, then going through a process of thinking about what do we need to do, and then you go through building it, and then you testing, and then releasing. And so the fun part of actually writing code is only one part of the job of a software developer. The other part is trying to figure out what were the original requirements, what are the needs of our users or customers, and then thinking about the design and then building. It's an important part, because otherwise sometimes it's tough to make these choices if you don't know what we need to do. So everything exists in this kind of context. I think one more a little bit, and then I'm going to answer some questions. Container tags for span and div. We have a way to be able to group elements together. Probably the main one that we're going to be using is a div element. Some divs just stands for dividing the page into sections or into small areas or groups of elements. And we can use this to be able to apply rules across to many elements at the same time. Div elements, we're going to have a look at in probably a few topics time. Can also help us in being able to understand the layout of a page. So when we get to grid, we'll be using divs to be able to show how much space an element takes up. I think we'll also do that in box model shortly. But we can group elements into it. So I could put paragraphs into another element and group them together. And one of the useful reasons of putting what we call nesting elements together is to be able to show to other people who are reading our code that these elements belong together. It's a way to neaten up the page that you're building to say these elements belong in this little group. We can give it a nice name, whatever name that you want to describe this group of elements to be. And then you can also use this class to be able to then target it and apply rules to it that we'll have a look at when we get to the CSS part. So divs are a container element. We can use span in the same way, like this, to be able to put some text into it, and maybe multiple bits of text. So the first two sections here are really about giving you sort of a running tour of some of the tools that we can use, some of the elements of the web page that we'll be able to use. We'll pick and choose which ones we need when we're trying to build something. And you'll probably have a look at this on Wednesday when we're trying to build tic-tac-toe and thinking about what elements do we need to construct, for example, the grid for the tic-tac-toe. Okay, I'm going to pause here to answer some questions. So we've got a few questions. Maybe do we have any priority order to the questions, Nathan or Patrick?
I've collected 4.
Cool, let's do them.
So the first one, Ebenezer asks, how did you get your beard looking nice like that? We'll start with that.
Oh my goodness. Oh, it's a great question. Very expensive tools. No, I'm joking. You sure that wasn't with regard to you, Nathan?
Trying to get some tips for myself.
Or was it with regard to Patrick? Who knows?
Sunday Typer asked, is there a reason why all of the files are called index.html, or is that just a convention?
Ooh, that's a really good one. That's a really good one. It is a convention. Now, there's some applications take that convention and they require you to name some files index.html. In index, what it is really is like a contents page. Like if you ever open up a book and go to like the very beginning, which has all the chapters by the page numbers, it's a quick snapshot of know what to do or where to go in that book. And the same thing is in when we write code like this. It's like the entry point, the beginning point for this part of the application. In which case, for the O2 elements, I would, if I see an index.html file, this would be like, okay, this is the starting point. This is where I'm going to start, and everything else links to it. All right, so you'll see index used a lot, not just for HTML files, but other files in general to show that this is the starting point for people to go and look at, whether it's a reader or a user.
Nice, thanks, Ed. I have a couple more.
Yep.
So Noah asked, why is button in quotations on the button element?
Oh, great question. So when I add information into the opening tag here, so again, we call this the opening tag, this part's the content, and this part's the closing tag. The opening tag, we can add more information about what the element does. In this case, I'm adding some information called a type and giving it a value. On the left-hand side here is an attribute. All elements have a set of possible attributes you can then apply to them, almost like customizing the element. I actually don't need a type button. So let's have a look if I think it came by default when I created the element. But if I just use it like this and refresh the page, I still have a clickable button. If you were on the course, we can talk about different types, a type button or a type submit, and what is the difference between these. But we don't need to go into it for now. But in terms of the original question, why is this in quotation marks? This is how we describe the difference between the attribute on the left for the element and then the value that it takes. All the values will be in these quotation marks. The technical word from this is a string. It's how we describe things in quotation marks. You'll learn more about strings tomorrow in JavaScript.
Fantastic. One more that we've seen multiple times coming up. What's the difference between a div and a span?
Yeah, nice. So div, let's have a look. Hello, some text. Para 1, para 2. So I'm going to add a few more spans like that. I'm looking down here at the bottom of my page here. Maybe I'm going to make this a little bigger. No, you can all see down here. It's just a bit out of the way. I've added 2 spans. These are inline elements. All right, so they don't stretch across the whole page, whereas paragraph elements do. What I can do is if I need to be able to have the browser show things side by side, I can use span as an inline element to be able to put those things next to each other. And span is also used mostly for text, whereas div is a little bit general purpose. We can put loads of different kinds of things in divs. So when you're trying to make a choice, if you're trying to group lots of text together, probably using span is probably a good thing. But if you're trying to just use lots of different kinds of elements, divs are probably your go-to choice here.
Thanks, Ed.
You're welcome. Cool. I see one question at the bottom here from Omar. Would it make any difference if we do not use indentation? And I need to answer this. There is no difference. But what happens? Let's have a look. I'm going to select everything, and I'm going to remove all the indentation, like this. This now becomes really hard to reason about how the page is structured. Everything's left aligned. I don't know what's nested in what, where things start and where things end. becomes a lot more difficult to read. So does it make any difference to the computer? None whatsoever. To people who are trying to read and maintain it, it makes a lot of difference. It makes debugging a lot slower. And this is really important because on the course, we drill home this idea that you don't write code for yourself. You write code for other people because that's in your job what you do. You're part of a team and you're writing code, hopefully for a stakeholder, some person who owns your requirements about what they want to build. So you're building it for them. And so we should always be thinking about how do I write code in such a way that other people could take it and extend it, take it and change it easily. All right. Cool. All right, I'm going to crack on with a couple more topics here, and then we can do some more questions, right? Let's go to the next set of elements over here. So new page, let's go to number 3. Okay, so we've got a few tasks to do for this one. Again, if you wanted to follow some of the code that I'm writing here, you can always go to the boolean.co.uk, booleanuk.github.io page, go to HTML, CSS, and find the one that we're on, and we're on number 3, links. All right, and this has got the completed version here to have a look at. If you want to go inspect this code, one thing we actually haven't talked about, which we'll use definitely a lot tomorrow and then the day after, is how do you see the code for this website? You can go to any page whatsoever and just right-click on your page and hit inspect, this little thing down here. And this should be available to you in whatever browser you're using. It might be named slightly different. It might be named like DevTools or the inspector or something else. So you might have to find a way in your particular browser, especially using a niche browser, to find the developer tools. But usually in any web page, you can right-click and inspect. And this brings up this lovely little tool on the right-hand side. This is your friend. And as it's your friend, you've got to be nice to it and treat it with respect. Basically, it has a lot of information for you to be able to know what's happening in your web page. So here's the HTML that you can see. And if you want to expand it, click on these little arrows here to see what's inside of them. So where does this come from? Well, the browser's made a request to get all of this stuff from this location up here. So we have a repository of information if you want to go to the source of it and find it there, and we'll also share that as well. Or you can just right-click this web page and have a look at the code that we've written here to represent this information. So this is like the complete version here in the Elements tab. You can also go to the sources if you want here and just copy it and paste all this code. But this is a way you can find like the complete information. It's probably the easiest way. And the other way is we have repository information, which we'll share with a link to the code as well. You'll get like a zip file and all the stuff as well. If you want to follow along as I'm doing it, you can have a look here. It's the first HTML page, there's elements, is number 3. So what do we have to do in this one here? We need to create an external link, an internal link, and jump to a point to this page. So this is something you've probably all seen a lot. Let's go to bbc.co.uk as an example. If you hover over any of these things, these are all links to be able to take you to some other place. For example, if I click on here, I know it's clickable because it has this lovely little blue text style, color style, and I have like an underline when I hover over it. I know there's some interaction I can have this. I click on it, and also the cursor changes. It goes from the normal black default cursor to this little pointer. There's always to signify when someone's building a web page that this is an interaction that you can have. So links everywhere. All the things I'm hovering over are links that will do something when I click on them. So how are we going to build those? Let's go back to the editor. Let's start off with an external link. I'm going to, which one am I doing? I don't know. What did I do here? I did, I went to Google. That's the link I created. All right, we'll go to something. Maybe we'll just use BBC. Let's create an external link. The way that we can create an external link using HTML is using the A to stand for anchor link. It has an opening tag and it has a closing tag. And it's got some content that we write. So this is what you click on. Go to bbc.co.uk. Maybe just BBC is easier. This in the little quotation marks is where we write that value. href stands for hyperlink reference. This is, again, one of those registered attributes that are available for the anchor link element. This is a required one for this element. And in order to be able to use it, I just copy and paste the link and put it in between the little quotation marks. So I go to bbc.co.uk, copy and paste, copy, paste. That's pretty much it. All right. Opening tag contains the information of where to go when you click on it, the content of where to go, of what you click on, and then we close the tag. So the browser knows, all right, link's finished. So I'm going to close this tab. I'm going to refresh this page. And now I've got my bbc.co.uk link here. If you hover over it, you can see in the bottom left-hand corner of my screen, it shows me the location of where I'm going to go. And I click on it, and I click on it. It's going to take me to the bbc.co.uk page. So we can add links like this to our page. Now, you might want to be able to not have to stay on page, like get your page to reload and take you away from where you currently are. So you might want to open that link in a new window tab. We can do the same thing here, but we add a little bit more information in that opening tag. We do something we call a target property, and we say, I want it to be blank. Right? Again, this is registered as an attribute available to the anchor link, and this is a specific value we need to give it if we want to open up in a new window tab. So if I refresh the page, I've got two links here. If I click on the second link, you can see it opens up a new window tab. I've still got this one available. But if I click on the first one, this tab changes. So all we do is we just add a little attribute value pair here, like this. So this is an external link. It goes outside of our computer, makes a request to go get some information from some other computer somewhere. In this case, this is the responsibility of bbc.co.uk to give me back that information. But we can also create an internal link. So I want to go back to that first HTML page up here within my own project. So I can still use an anchor link for this, anchor link, but instead of using HTTP to make a request, I can just simply point it back to the same file. So in which case, I'm going to go to 01 intro HTML and then get my index page. There's a few things here that I'll explain in a second. This is go back to start. And so I get a link here. Again, it shows me exactly where it's going to go in the bottom left of the camera corner. And if I click on this, it takes me back to the Hello World page, the one that we built together. So there's a few things I did here. It doesn't start with HTTP. It starts with these two dots. And this is a signal to my the browser to know where to go find this file. In this case, I say, please go up to my parent directory. So if I'm in 03 link, it goes back up to 01 HTML and then goes into intro and then goes finds index. So I'm just pointing it to the right place. All right, now you can worry so much about the two dots and things like that, but this is basically just trying to make sure the browser says from this file index.html in 03 link, we can't just directly jump across into this file. We have to just follow the tree. We go back up into the parent directory and down back into index.html. So I just give it the right path. And so this is the way that you would do it, to be able to point it to an internal file rather than an external file. You can also use an anchor link to jump to a point to the same page. So imagine if I wanted to, I've got these four different paragraphs as currently represented here, paragraph 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I wanted to use some HTML to say, I want to click on a link and jump to paragraph 3. And we can use an anchor link for that. In addition to external links and internal links, I can point to this paragraph 3. In order to do that, I need to give it an ID. how do I give this paragraph an ID so I can choose it? Well, in the opening tag, I simply choose to give it on an ID attribute and give it a name that I'll use later. Let's just call it paragraph 3, for example. So by giving it a little bit more information, I can now select it. So I take that name for it and say, okay, please go to paragraph 3. I'll give it some text so I can click on it, go to paragraph 3. I use the little hashtag here to represent the ID. So it's going to find on the page anything that has an ID called paragraph 3, and I've given it here. So these two things have to match, paragraph 3 and paragraph 3. This has to match this hashtag and then the ID. So they all have to work together. I give it some information and say, okay, please choose me when you click on the link. So I'm going to refresh the page, go to paragraph 3, I click on it, and the browser automatically goes to paragraph 3. There's a way to be able to add a little bit more navigation in your own application to be able to go to different parts of your page. So sometimes you have a very long page, but nicely formatted, so you have like a little set of index up here. I can click on different parts of it and it just takes me directly rather than having to manually scroll all the way. And that's how it works. I've added a little bit of a smoother transition. So if you check out the CSS, which we'll get to in just a second, there's this one extra bit here that I've added here to help smooth out that transition. We'll have a look at what happens. If I comment this out, which means the browser won't actually display it. And then let's go through that process again. I'm going to refresh the page. Got rid of one too many characters. I go to paragraph 3, you see it literally just jumped automatically. There was no scrolling, which maybe isn't that much nicer as an interaction. So you can adjust it if you want to be able to have a smooth interaction, to be able to ideally have a nice experience. So those are links. You'll see them everywhere, and they're really useful to have as navigation, as a way to be able to give signposts to users about how to interact with your application, about where to go and what to do. So links are super important to be able to help users get to where they need to get to quickly and usefully. Images, and we'll have a quick pause after images to be able to answer any questions, and then we're going to dive straight into CSS for a few minutes. Images. They are quite similar in the way that they need a way to be able to find where the image file is. So in the same way that we're using links to go to external or internal places, we can do the same thing with images. Let's open our next page. So we're going to see an image in the page, and we're going to see an image from an external source. So you have a couple options whenever you're thinking about images, about where to store them. You can store them externally in some other location, or you can store them in the actual project itself. And you can see on the left-hand side, I've got like this little lovely image here from Boolean. In order to use the image element, all I need to do is use the image element like this. This is an interesting element because it's self-closing. We don't need to worry about adding any more closing tags, because all we need to do is give it an instruction to know where to go get the file for the image, and it will display it. So in this case, we need to give it a relative path. What does that mean? Well, I need to give it instruction of where to go find it. And on the left-hand side here, the image folder is at the same level as index. So it's on the same level. I can use // indicate go in the current directory and find me the image folder, and find me the file called logo.png. We should always give it a description of what it is. This is like the Boolean logo. This helps for people who navigate the web in different ways. Like screen readers will read out the information about what is the alt value for the image element, so people can who can't see or have other kinds of vision impairments will be able to know how to interact with your application. as this is highly recommended to make sure we always add relevant alt attributes and values. Cool, I've just refreshed my page. We see the Boolean logo there. Imagine if I broke the path, say, for example, I got a typo, and this is what happens. You can see the alt text here as well. So it's not just useful for people who need to be able to have some useful information about the page because they have some vision impairment. It also helps if you accidentally get a typo, you know what it was meant to be, rather than just seeing this like lovely sign, which I'm sure many of you have already seen before. The sort of broken image sign. Please make sure you always add alt attributes into your images. And we can also source an image from an external page. So if we go to, let's go to Boolean co.uk. Let's go to our software development course. Let's find an image. Let's find this image. Look at this. This is probably from our first cohort. Any image that you like, you can open up into a new tab, and let's get like the URL for this image. And look, it's Patrick again. Oh, it's me down there as well. And we can use this image in our web page. So I'm using an image element here. I can use an image element here, and rather than give it a local or a relative address, I'm giving it an external address, cohort 1, I think. And it appears on my webpage. So these are this is a local image and this is an external image. And it's always a pro and con about which one you choose, whether you want to store all the images locally or always source external images. There are pros and cons with that with each approach. So these are images. We haven't looked yet how to size them and things like that, but we'll get onto that in just a moment. Okay, so we've done links and images. Let's pause for a couple of questions and then we'll dive into CSS.
So I've got 3.
Yeah.
The first one is, how is debugging in HTML? It looks like figuring out the point of an error is a monumental task.
Oh, such a good question. Debugging is one of the most fundamental skills a software developer can have. And there's a saying I like to use, and sometimes I get this mixed up. But all, I'll make sure I get this correct. All great debuggers are great programmers, but not all programmers are great debuggers. Right? I think that's the right way around. Which is to say that if you can really upskill in your ability to get visibility to debug a program, you're going to be a great programmer. Right? It's such a fundamental skill, and we really focus on a lot on the course here. So when it comes to debugging HTML and CSS, you will rely on your developer tools, this stuff in here. This gives you visibility. And as with all debugging, it's all an issue of getting visibility into how your code works. There's always an assumption that you make about how it works, and the reality, and closing that gap is going to be the way that you get better at debugging. Verifying your assumptions, testing out your assumptions, and getting visibility. So you know how your code is actually working. The biggest problem that beginners have is they make a lot of assumptions and don't know how to get visibility, and they get stuck, which is reasonable. But this this tool here to look at your elements, see how the browser's using it, look at the console, see any errors that are happening, see what files are being loaded by the browser, one of the best ways to get visibility.
Thanks, Ed.
Yep.
Next question was, why did you use _blank and not just the word blank in the links?
It's a great question. So let's go to MDN, which is a Mozilla Developer Network. It's a company that is responsible for maintaining a lot of really fantastic and useful documentation. And let's have a look at target blank. Target. Okay, so this, I'm looking at the element for the anchor link that we're just looking at, and target is one of the attributes. Again, as I said, all attributes are registered, so the ones that you can actually use. If you don't use it, it doesn't exist. You can try and do some random attributes. We've seen the href that we're using for the anchor link to say where to go. The target attribute is one of them, and it has some values. It's basically the short answer to your question. It's just the value that we need to use. It's like a predetermined value that we choose to use. We can use underscore self, underscore blank, underscore parent, underscore top, right? But what I'm doing here is just trying to show you, if you need to go find out what the values are, just use the documentation for it. I don't know all the ones off the top of my head. So this is why.
Fantastic. One more.
Yep.
What is the difference between using SRC and href?
Yeah. For images, we need to use source. It's, as I said, one of the available attributes here. We just have to know which ones it is. But for links, we have to use href. So for links, as you saw, we used a hyperlink reference. It's just what the element needs to be able to do its work.
Thanks, Ed.
Nice job. Cool. So let's have a look at introduction to CSS. So we've just been laying content out of our page at the moment, and without any respect to what kind of width or height or size or anything. And if you think of HTML as like the skeleton of a web page, the actual content that we need to use or display to a user, then CSS is all the extra stuff around the skeleton, the skin, the muscles, the hair, all the lovely things that people use. That's probably not the most accurate of metaphors, but I think you know what I mean. So we start off with the skeleton, which is the content, and then we apply a style to it to change how it looks. But we start off with the content. JavaScript then animates it, so it has, rather than like a static person, an actual person who moves. I think the metaphor works. So let's have a look at how we can target different parts of the page and change them. So this is introducing our second language, CSS. Right? And this is how most websites are built, using HTML and CSS, the content and the way to change how it looks. Let's open this up. So I've got some text here that I want to change. I want to change this to be blue. I want this to be red. I don't want this to be red. I want this also to be blue and this to be red. So a few things I need to figure out how I'm going to target. I'm going to open up my developer tools here on the right click, inspect, and make sure I have this open here. This gives me visibility on what's happening here. And the one I'm going to use more is this tab on the right-hand side called styles. This is going to give me a little bit more information about what's happening here. We'll talk about this box in a few minutes. I'm going to open up on the right-hand side here. Get rid of you. Another style sheet, another file called style.css. And I'm now going to have two files working together, but I need to link them, all right? Because when I open my browser, and you can do it in a few different ways. If you're using Code Sandbox, your Code Sandbox is opening your index.html file. If you're using an editor, your computer is opening that file for you, or the browser is opening that file in your file system. You need to be able to then tell your browser to load another file. So I'm going to write a rule here, and we'll talk about the rule, and then I'm going to make sure these things are linked together. So let's do something quite drastic so we know that we have this set up. I'm going to say, I'm going to target the body. I'll explain the syntax in a second. And I'm going to set the background color to something quite horrific. Let's say red. It's going to hurt everyone's eyes. Are you ready for this? Oh, look at that. Gosh. All right, let's not do that. That was harsh. But you can see that I've been able to affect the page using CSS. Now, line 8 here is really important. This is how I'm linking these two pages together. These two files together. The HTML is what the browser reads first of all. All right, it goes through line by line, trying to understand what it needs to do. It gets to line 8 and says, okay, I need to link a style sheet. Where? We're going to use an href to point to that style sheet. So we have to make sure that this path is where it should be. So if it's right next to each other in HTML and style.css, all you need to do is give the file name, right? This needs to correspond to the name of this file. So if I change this file name, let's call it main.css. Oops. Why have I got caps lock on? Main, there we are. If I change this, I also need to make sure I change this here, right? They have to be the same. So this is responsible for saying, please go find me the start sheet and then make sure you load it so it affects the page. So we need this link element here. Most editors, you can just type in link and press tab and it will auto-complete for you. So make sure you change the href value to be something that is accurate. So this links the style sheet so I get HTML and CSS working together. All right, HTML is responsible for content. CSS is responsible for how it looks. How do I target the page? Well, at the moment, I'm using this format here. I choose the part, the selector that's on the left, and then in the curly brackets are the rules that I want to apply to the page. Each rule consists of a property and a value. And all websites are like this. All right. Sometimes they package them up into like groups of these things. So you need to wipe out all the specific ones individually. But this is how CSS is written. We have a selector and we just have tons and tons of properties and values. All right. Properties that will affect everything on the page, from rounded corners to the opacity, to the hue, to spacing, to everything, like hovering over things. All these things are guided and ruled by CSS properties. We just need to know the right properties to target the right things that we want. So in this case, I knew off the top of my head that background color is a property that I can affect, and I'm choosing it to be red. All right, we'll talk about colors shortly about what values we can give to this. But this is one way to be able to check have I linked the start sheet correctly, is just make sure it's something visible to you. But this is always the format that we use: the selector, the curly brackets, and then the rule separated with a semicolon. All right. Property with a colon, and then the rule with a semicolon at the end. Property, value, and we have multiples of them. So I'm going to disable this for the moment. And I'm going to target the heading, the H1 element, that should be blue. So I'm going to target it. How? I'm going to use an element selector. What's the element name in H1? And I open up my curly brackets to say what I want it to do. The title should be blue. I'm going to use the color property and say, please be blue. So far, so good. A little bit of mistake down here. This should be red, not blue, but we'll have a look at that later. So blue and blue, so far, so good. I've selected all the H1 elements. Right? It's not just the first one. It's any element that matches H1. Let's do the same thing with the paragraph. Right? Let's say this text should be red. I'm going to add a property here called color and give it red. That's one way to do it. All right, but again, I've got two mistakes here, not two mistakes, but things I have to solve. This shouldn't be red, but this should be. So how can I be a little bit more selective? Rather than just choose all of the elements of matching a certain name, how can I be a little bit more specific? Well, let's use a different kind of selector, not just the element selector, but a class selector. In order to use a class selector, I need to add a little bit more information to my HTML page. So rather than target all paragraph elements, I'm going to create a separate selector called, let's say, red. Sure. All right. I'm creating a class selector called red.red. So I need to then add this information. At the moment, there's nothing with a class of red in my HTML. So I can choose what is able to have this class. But before I do anything, I've just done one change. I'm going to refresh the page. And you can see I'm no longer applying those rules to the paragraph because it's not being selected. It's this class that's called .red. So how do I add that information to the page? What should be red? This paragraph should be red. So inside of the paragraph opening tag, I'm going to use class equals red. Then this finally will get a match. All right, it says, please, anything that has class red, change to color red. So it will find this match here on line 14. So far, so good. This title should be red. So can we apply it down here as well? Well, you just take this class and say anything that matches the class, you can also be red. This title should be red. So we have element selectors and class selectors. We can add classes to any elements, and you can add multiple classes if you want to, separated by a space. But for the moment, we're just going to keep with one class at the moment. Interestingly, if you inspect the page, right-click, inspect the page, and open up the body element and go down to your, the title should be red, you can see it's actually picked up both the rules, red and for H1. Because it is an H1 element, so it's picked up the rule for color blue, and it's picked up the rule for class red, because it has class red. So it's picked up both the rules, but only applied, or it's applied both, but the one that takes precedence is the one that is the class selector. And there is actually a mathematical number of points to understand or to resolve the order in which rules are applied. But as a rule of thumb, class rules will always take precedence over element selectors. But you can see it's been picked up and it's just been underlined, or strike through to show it's not been applied. You can play around in your browser. It's all temporary by enabling and disabling rules to see what happens when you disable a rule, and play around with it as well in here. But this is how CSS works in general, right? We write HTML, we add a little bit more information about the elements, and then we can target it using CSS. We target different parts of the page to do things with it. Cool. Let's have a look at some colors. Let's do a little bit more. Let's go U over here and put the start sheet on the right hand side. So colors always fun. Let me open up number 6. I want to give these all a bit of different kinds of color. Let me just save that. And go back to here. And how am I going to do that? To demonstrate the color picker, we'll start off with the one that we just saw. So these are all going to be paragraph elements, and we're going to all give them red, but in different ways. All right, so this should be fun. Color red. This is the first one we saw just beforehand. All right, color property and giving the name as a value. This is a paragraph. It's now red. Open up my inspector again. Right, click inspect. Go to the elements tab. Click on red name, and I can see I've got the color red here. I can disable it, goes back to black, enable it. Now this red, if I click on this little red thing, this little red square, I can open up the color picker and I can play around with colors. So there's all tons of colors you can play around with to sort of decide what kinds of colors that you want. So you can see on the left-hand side, my lovely rainbow paragraph. I can just keep doing this slowly. You can see it changing all through the colors of the rainbow, which is kind of cool. But other things that we can do here is find different ways to represent color. There's a few things you can see here. When I've changed it, say I want like a lovely blue color, say that one. The color here has got this like very different value. It's no longer blue or red. It's got the hex, it's got a hashtag sign and these numbers and letters. And we call this a hexadecimal value. So if I like it, I can copy the value and let's go down to hex actually. Let's use color like this. So now my third one is going to be this color. I've called it red, but it should be red, but it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter what color it is. But I can also apply colors, not just using names of it, which is only a few colors, but I can choose any color I want using a hexadecimal value. So you can explore by clicking this little color picker and choosing choosing any color that you want. There's some like main ones for you to choose from, or you can choose anything that you want. You can also click this little drop-down value to change for another way of choosing colors, which is the red, green, blue values, RGB. And you can use that. So let's say, for example, this is a color that I want. And I'm going to put that up here, color red, green, blue, and give you the values for each of the different hues, or colors rather. Oh, wrong one. So this is now a different color. There's a few other color types that you can use. red, green, blue, but also with some opacity. We could keep that opacity in there. Let's say, for example, let's go to green. Let's go to RGBA, but also use the second slider to say I want it to be actually quite opaque. That's that value. And then we'll copy this across. And whack that in here. Refresh the page, and you can see my fourth one now has some color, but also is a little bit more opaque or less opaque. It's more transparent. And we can keep going. There's a few more color types here for you to have a look at. For hue, saturation, and light, and hue, white, and blackness. A few different types here for you to explore if you want to just cycle through different options here. To have a look at those different ways of using color. Mostly you'll be using RGB values and hex values because they give you a little bit more control. But I think at some point CSS will switch to using some kind of HSL, HWB syntax for values. But that's pretty much enough for the color. Knowing that these things exist and where to find them is the main point here. Nathan, have you got any questions? Obviously.
Yep, got a few.
Let's do some.
So I've got a couple that are kind of related to each other. So the first one is it common practice to use CSS to design a website, or would you design it in a tool like Figma and then modify the CSS that those programs give you? Amazing question. Okay, so it's probably depending on your role and how you're building or how big the team is, what happens. Let's imagine you're in a team, a tech team, where you have some designers available to you who will primarily be using a tool like Figma. Figma is a design tool where you can, without any code, arrange how a page is going to look, which gives you all the CSS things to apply and the HTML elements, and then you can just apply them and build it quite quickly. But sometimes you get a designer will lay out a design using a tool like that and then give it to a developer to then implement. So the developer doesn't actually have to do any choices, doesn't have to make any choices. They just have to implement it and make sure it's working and things like that. And there might be some conventions in the way the team organizes their code and things like that. They need to do some kind of translation from the Figma CSS code or whatever else it does to the way the team operates. But it's usually just a translation job rather than just having to understand what colors to choose and the layout. So it's a great thing to have advantage of if you do have someone giving you Figma layouts or things like that, because then you can just implement it without having to think about it. So to answer your question, it really depends on the team. Some teams won't have access to a tool like that, and they'll give you like screenshots or little mock-ups that you then have to implement yourself rather than a tool like Figma. Amazing answer. I think you've pretty much answered the next question, but if you want to expand on it, please do.
Yeah.
What's the difference between a website designer and a front-end developer?
A nice question. And more and more these days, they're overlapping. Where website designers take on more ability to write HTML, CSS, and debug it, and maybe even write some JavaScript. And front-end developers are reaching more and more into these design tools to help understand them and use them. But principally, a designer works mostly with the users and any other stakeholders that own the requirements for that interface. So they get it absolutely spot on. They don't necessarily need to write that much code, but they can be responsible for the design and whatnot. And then they pass on their design to a developer to implement. And that's usually the biggest distinction between those two roles.
Fantastic. How do you disable parts of HTML or CSS?
Good question. The easiest way is just to comment things out. So on Windows, it's Control//. On Mac OS, it's Command//. And you can just comment these out. If they're commented out, they won't be displayed by the browser. So that's probably the best thing I can think of in terms of disabling the code that the browser is trying to display. And the same way with these rules, we can just select all the rules and just say, sorry, I'm going to comment them out, so you don't actually have to apply them. So it's all blacked out. So this is probably the quickest way.
Another way to do this is if I just re-enable these. Is to just play around in your browser. If I right-click this, I could probably like just get rid of it. If I double-click here and just like start to just play around with it, it's now gone. First paragraph, or I could like click on here and disable some of the rules here. Again, this is all temporary until I refresh the page. So just removing and disabling, then I refresh, it all comes back. So I think that's probably the best answer I have about disabling things, is just using comments to sort of say, browser, please don't run this code.
Fantastic. Last one.
Yeah.
We've had a few people bring this up, and I think we need to address it. Why can't we spell color correctly?
Oh dear. Such a bone of contention. I know. I'm one of those people that will always try and use color with a U, but I didn't write CSS, so we have to use the Americanized version. These are all values or properties that have been written by the original, founding people of the language, and they decided what's what. So if we want to change it, we'd have to put in a change request to CSS language and see whether it would get accepted by all the browsers, and not just each one. But I appreciate the question. If you feel for us here in the UK, feel for outside of the English-speaking world, they still have to use English when they're writing HTML and CSS and JavaScript. So it becomes quite tricky for them, I imagine, to be able to use these languages. But that's what they do.
Amazing. Thanks, Ed.
Yeah, good questions. Keep asking questions. It's really great. Okay, so we've got half an hour. I want to get to grid, so we'll stop again after background image. We're gonna do 4 in one row, and then we're gonna finish with some grid. I think these ones will go a little bit more quickly. So we have some text that we can style as well. So I'm going to open up my style sheet on the right hand side. I'm going to actually demonstrate that. So let's go to that. I'm going to open up this in my browser, open up number 7. Okay, open up my developer tools so I can see this. I've got some basic looking text in the web page. I want to be able to apply some rules to it. The first thing I want to do is to change the font. This is quite a common thing to do. Websites like to have their own different fonts. The easiest way to apply different fonts to your pages is to use probably Google fonts. The way we do this is just type into your browser Google fonts, go to fonts.google.com, and basically scroll until you find something that you like. You can search fonts, choose a few different kinds of fonts, but basically just go find one that you like. Let's say, for example, I know this is a random one. I'm going to choose this one. So I clicked on it, and I'm going to, on the right-hand side here, this probably should be empty. I'm going to, over this one down here, I'm going to click on this regular 400. Click on it, and it pops up on the right-hand side here. Use on the web to embed a font, copy the code into the head of your HTML. Remember, the head in our web page is the stuff of, it's not things that we're going to actually see in the page, but it's like the metadata, things that will help display the information. So I'm going to copy this set of HTML, copy. I'm going to whack it into the head element. So I'm going to whack it in here. Just paste. We don't really need to talk about the things it's doing. We're just going to copy and paste. That's it. The next thing is the CSS rules to specify the font families. So I'm going to copy this and put it into my CSS. I'm going to target the paragraph elements. So all paragraph elements are going to pick up this font family. And it's going to be available to me because I've linked my font style sheets from Google. Okay, so go back to my browser, go back to CSS for text, reload the page. And you can see I get some fancy new text. So that's the quick way to be able to use different kinds of fonts. Other ways you would get fonts is your designer or other parts of your team will be able to like give you fonts to include your project, and there's a slightly different way of going about that. But for the main approach for today, you can just use fonts.google.com to look up any fonts you want and then apply them, following the directions in here. So select the styles, see on the right hand side, and then copy and paste into your project. What else can we do here? We can also set the size of the font. So font size, let's set it to be slightly bigger at 20 pixels. I'm going to refresh the page. We can see it's slightly bigger. 20 pixels is like a fixed unit. I think we're only demonstrating fixed units. We're going to be a little bit of relative units shortly to be able to set the size of something. If I wanted to change the line height, so the height in between each line, I could use line height. And so let's do something quite drastic to start off with. 30 pixels, 50 pixels to 100 pixels. You can see each line is now getting larger and larger and larger. You can set this accordingly as a fixed unit or as a relative unit in terms of how big the font is, as a factor of 2 or 3, etc. There's a few different ways that you could change the way that your text looks. For our heading over here, CSS text rules, we can underline it. Text decoration is a property that you want for this. I think it's just underline like that. Yeah, you can see there's now applies an underline. I don't know this on top of my head. Text transform, uppercase. Oh, look at that. I didn't know that off the top of my head. CSS text rules. And then if I want to center it vertically and horizontally, probably the most straightforward approach at the moment. Centering is always one of those like tricky things, hardest things in life, death, taxes, and centering things. Don't quote me on that. Center vertically and horizontal typo there, is to use text align center. That puts it in the middle, and fine enough in terms of where it is. So that is trying to style some text. We can also style the buttons simply using background color. So we have a button. I guess I can do that. Background color. Let's say yellow. Let's do a fantastic color. Typo background. Now I've got this lovely little yellow button on the left here, and if I hover over it, and this is one of a new kind of selector, this says please apply this rule on the button element when it's in the state of hover. Let's do something quite drastic. Let's go to blue. So if I hover over it, you can see it goes to blue. You can also inspect the page. It goes to the button element, right click it and force state active or hover to see what happens on that state. So rather than having to hover over it, you can tell your browser, please just hover over it like manually. So it's right click and force the state, right click, force state, hover, and then just refresh the page together. There's a few different things you can do to text. These are some of the main ones of trying to apply rules to. So anything else, you can probably just think of it and then Google it and to find out how to do it. So we need to talk a little bit more. We've done some basic style rules at the moment for changing color and applying some kinds of transformation to text. Getting some fonts and I'm not sure how this was included in text, but there we are. Let's have a look at some width and height of things. And this is probably the other tough area that we'll finish on today. Let's have a look at width and height. Move you over here. the other ones, and then open this up in the browser. Okay, so look at this fantastic page, width and height. You've got some filler text, and we've got a background color of red at the moment for this element. What I want to do is, let's not have any text for the moment. I've got this empty element called div. I've got some comments about things that we're going to do to it. And I'm setting the background color to be red for matching any element that has the name of div. If I reload the page, I don't see anything on the page. It's an important thing to focus on to start off with. Div is on the page. We can see it here, but it's got no height. We can see here, if I hover over it, on the left-hand side of my screen, you can see that little box that pops up with div in purple, and then the numbers 1491 times 0. That's the width and the height. But we don't see anything on the page because it's got no height. Inherently, divs don't have any height to them. They will take on the height of any content that they have. So if I add some filler text like this and then refresh the page, it fills up to the point at which there is content. You can see here, it'll always be the height of the current content. So we can add some text to see the background color. Let's add width and height to see how this impacts the background color. I can fix the width and height. So let's say, for example, I want the width to be, let's start off with, say, 600 pixels. I refresh the page. It's now constricted the width of this element to be always 600 pixels. You can see it's now 600 by 90 at the moment. I change the width of the page, and it doesn't really do anything to the element. It's always now going to be 600 pixels. The height has been adjusted automatically, but the width has always been at 600 pixels. If I change the height, let's say I want it to be at 20 pixels. You can see if I set the height of the element, all this text basically comes outside of the box, right? Outside this little div element. If I hover over the div, you can see it takes up that amount of space on the page, and all the text is like trying to flow outside of it, because the browser is still going to try its best to show all the text that you've asked it to do, and it'll be outside of the area it should be, which is why the red background color doesn't extend to the whole element, because the text is now outside of the element. So using fixed height or using fixed units is tricky for this problem. You sometimes run into content going outside of the area you've told it can only be using a fixed unit. So in this case, you have a couple options: increase the height to something that is able to support all of that content and fix it there. Again, when we resize the page, it's problematic. Or we choose some kind of relative unit. So we could say, let's say that the minimum height has to be 100 pixels. If we do that, then we know that it will always be a certain amount, but could be large. It could be taller, right? In which case the height is much bigger. So it allows for a maximum height, but it does set the minimum height. You're supposed to be careful of the minimum height, so we have enough text for it to be able to be displayed. So this is one way around it, width and height, and thinking about fixed units. We can also fix the width. I've already did this, and if we fix the width with maximum width, see what we do with maximum width. Let's say, for example, I want the maximum width to be, let's do 600 pixels. It'll only ever be maximum, but can also be less than that. So it's another technique to be able to always keep your content in the right place. Setting max width to be a certain amount rather than setting the minimum height. And depending on your content to begin with, you would choose, do I need to set a maximum width or minimum height? Or when we get there, we'll be able to actually change the configuration of the page based on the screen width, and we're using some kind of media query. There's a few different techniques here to be what we call more responsive, because these days everyone's devices are all different unique sizes and shapes that you're never really guaranteed how things are going to look on different devices. And so more and more we should be thinking of relative units rather than just fixed units, so things will display properly in different devices. We spent a bunch of time on the course trying to make sure that we organize things responsibly in different layouts, organizing and looking at replicating the way that different websites behave. So, for example, one we commonly use is go back to the bbc.co.uk website to sort of analyze how this works. Is when you reduce the size of the page, you can see that the layout changes in terms of how many articles you see until it gets down to the minimum width. So this kind of responsive design, you can see things are changing as you expand and minimize or reduce the size of your screen. So responsive design is important to be able to make sure that you're supporting different kinds of devices, and relative units help you with this. We'll play around with more width and height shortly, but also when we get to tic-tac-toe, when we get to Space Invaders, looking at how we use width and height of different elements to achieve the desired effects. How can we know width and height? Well, we've got a way that the browser renders each element according to the box model. And so let's introduce this idea of how much space an element takes up, so we can better reason and understand how to set width and height. So let's have a look at the next section. So this is our starting point here. I'm going to open up my browser to be on this page and this page. Okay, so again, on the left, we have 3 elements. Each of them are div elements with some extra data about how we can target each one using class selectors. So the first one's could be rectangle. We can see we target anything with a class rectangle with this set of rules. And some comments here about what we're going to do. Circle and square. So let's have a look at the rectangle. Enforcing, we'll go to the rectangle here. Currently, we've set width and height to a fixed unit of 500 pixels in width and 300 pixels in height, with the background color in red, which is why we see it like this on the page. We're looking at this red up here. We can affect the border. And let's have a look at the long way of doing it first. 3 properties, border width, style, and color, that target the border of any element. So we can set the width of it to be a certain size, the style of it to be solid rather than some kind of dashed or dotted line or things like that, or something even more customizable, and the color. And let's start off quite simply with a border like this. So I refresh the page, you can now you can see this black border. You can be quite dramatic if you want a huge border in your elements. But if I right click and inspect this and look at this box down here on the bottom right hand side of your screen, when you use your developer tools, you can see the blue area is the content, 500 by 300, which is how I've specified it, width and height, 500 by 300. And then the space around padding, which has got no values, and then border of 20, 20, 20 on each side, which is why or how this property is working. It said, please set the width of each border around the size to be 20 pixels. So I can now start to reason better about how much space is taking up. Not just taking up width of 500 at the moment, taking 500 and then 20 on each side, so 540. Right, so if I hover over it, you can see in the little div.rectangle that appears on the screen, it's 540 by 340, right? Because the height is 340. 300 plus 20 on each side for the border. So we can start to see how much space this element actually takes up, right? Not 500 by 400, but 540 by 340. There's a shortcut for this. If I comment that out, I can, I guess I'll just top of my head, border is something like solid, no, black, solid, black, solid, 20 pixels. double check. Let's half it. Just make sure. Yeah. Okay. So if you don't want to set each property individually, which is quite laborious, you could just set it all in one go. If you know the values, they are in order. The color comes first, the style comes second, and then the width comes third. You can actually set each edge at a time. This I might actually have to look up. Might be something like border top. 20 pixels. That's clearly not a value because it's now removed it. So let's go find the actual border top. I think I actually have to set all of them. So do something like this: 20 pixels, solid and black, because they just like to confuse you. There's a slightly different order. So now I've got 20 pixels here. In which case, you can specify each edge if you want to. There's a few more things you can do here to have a look at the different styles. So you could, for example, decide that you want different border styles for different parts of your board. Right, in this case, the top and bottom is going to be solid, and the left and right is going to be dashed. All right, the order again is important. The first one, the top is the top and the bottom, and then the dash is the left and right. You could also change the width to be something like this, where your top border is now 2 pixels, and then left and right is 5 pixels and 10 pixels on the bottom. So you can see the border up here. So you can be very customizable with these things, and you can check the box model to see exactly the width of your element now, so you can make sure things are aligned on the page. So everything's quite customizable. You can round the corners, and you can also change different colors as well and be specific for different edges. In this case, we can change the border color accordingly, so you get below the top orange, purple and green, or you could round those borders to using border radius, and maybe let's change it to like 15 pixels. You can see you're now getting some curved corners here. It might be something that you see a lot of, and actually any of the circles that you ever see on a web page are basically just border radius. So if you have a look at the circle, and we use border radius, we just set it to be 50% rather than a fixed unit. So always take the shape and say, whatever you are, let's curve each corner into exactly half of the size. So you can see now this square gets rounded exactly 50% in each corner, so it becomes a circle. I want to add some margins. I can also add margin. Margin is a property that helps push elements away from each other. So if I add 20 pixels, let's say, for example, around that rectangle, you can see it's now pushed away from the sides. If I hover over this element, you can see the orange around each side is 20 pixels, with a lot more on the right-hand side. Because it starts on the left, it renders on the left, goes until it finishes with fixed width, and the rest is margin, because this is a block element. All divs are block elements. What does that mean? Well, in this image down here, we can look at how much width is taking up and how much height. I can, again, like the other ones, I can target all edges, or I can target just the bottom. Margin at the bottom, please be, let's say, 40 pixels. And it pushes more stuff away, and you can see it now changed to 40. Let's have a look at the square to introduce our last part of this box model, where it's the padding part. Padding can increase the element width. So we start off with a square width 300 and height 300. I'm going to inspect this to verify. You can see we've got 300 and 300. If I hover over the square, it tells me it's 300 by 300. If I add some padding, let's say 20 pixels on each side, my green square is now bigger, right? I hover over it, it's now 340 by 340. Still got content 300 by 300 plus 20 on each side. Now, sometimes I don't actually want that to happen. I want to be able to say width and height should be the source of truth, no matter how much padding or how much border there is. in which case we change the way the browsers we calculate the width and height, and we use something called box sizing. And this can be a much easier, much more natural way to understand how much space an element takes up. I'm going to save this. I'm going to refresh the page, and my little box goes back down to 300 total, 300 by 300. But in the box model, you see the content area is reduced because it now takes into account padding as well. So if you set width and height, like I have done here, and you use box sizing border box, it means that you can now rely on width and height to always be accurate, rather than trying to always construct manually from padding and border how much width and height your element has. So in general, box sizing with the value border box is a generic style that you always want to help you reason about the width and height or dimensions of your element. And so you can always hover over them, and they should be taking up exactly how much space you originally said they should be. 500 by 300, 300 by 300, and then the last one is 300 by 300. We're coming up to the end here at 6:50. I want to make sure we do some grid. So I'm going to quickly get through background image, do some questions, and then go into one bit of grid. I've got some extension for more grids if we get there, but I want to make sure we get to 11. Okay, so background images. How can we add images as backgrounds? This is quite a common thing if we want to overlay text on top of an image. So I want to open up this. Let us go into 10. Okay, so I currently have a class selected for duck image. You can guess what image is going to be inside of here. And I've set the width and height of this element that has a class duck image to be 500 by 300 with a background color blue. So I want to set a background image. In order for me to be able to do that, I need to ask CSS to find me an image. In this case, I'm going to use the background image property with a value called URL. This is important because this will say, please go get me the file at this location. It's going to go into the image folder over here and get me out my little duck. I'm then going to make sure it's the correct size, because there are some default sizes images come with, however big it was, and we'll have a look at why that's important. Let's start off with some default properties for background, repeat, and position. I'll just start with center and place. Let's say no repeat. And we can see that we get a lovely little duck image here in my div. Again, the location is important. If I choose a different kind of starting value for the background size property, let's say, for example, just choose whatever automatic size it comes with, it's like a huge duck, right? I don't know, let's see if we can find it. How big is it? Let's drastically increase the size of this duck image element. It's not even big enough to hold the images in its natural form. All right, so controlling the size of images, especially if people upload them, you don't really know where your images come from, making sure everything's the standard size is going to be actually quite important. So we're going to contain it to the current element. So that's going to fit within the borders at scale. And it's not going to repeat. You could ask it to repeat if you had like some kind of nice background image that neatly repeats itself. In this case, seeing just like the little beak of a duck is probably not there. Not nice thing, but you might want it. Or you can start off maybe at the left-hand side for the repeat or the right-hand side, for example. So there's a number of different things here. Maybe if I could just, rather than repeat it, just no repeat. And we just move that image around. Where does it start off with? Probably center is the most common. Center, no repeat, contained for the moment. As a background image, which is different to using an image element, we can then write some content over the top of it. Hello, coding week. And there is some content to the top here over the element that has the image. So there's a couple extra properties here. Again, if you want to go double check these, go look them up on the MDN website to go find background size and what other values you can take, the background image, and then any repeat or position values here. Cool. We've got 5 minutes. I'm going to ask for a couple more questions. I'm going to race through grid, and then I'm going to ask Patrick to wrap up. So we might run about 4 or 5 minutes over until about 7:05. So please feel free to stick around if you want to. But let's do a couple of questions.
Ed, so I've got a couple. I'll stick them very related to CSS. Would
Nice.
box model be the method you would use to divide a web page into areas to display things like multiple articles, for example?
Nice. So it's a great question. The box model represents the way that we can reason about the width and height of an element. You can think of it as these 4 different boxes that the image takes up. So every element we can think about in terms of the box model: what content area, what padding area, what border area, and what margin area.
Nice. Gareth asks, what is the meaning of life? I think we'll just skip over that one.
42.
Excellent. So CSS, is it only used for web designing, or does it have other uses as well?
As a technology for the web, it's primarily, I can't think of any other reason why you would end up trying to use CSS. We use CSS to select parts of the page to then add rules. So it needs some content to exist to begin with. So it's used in conjunction with HTML. You can do some quite neat transformations. I saw some kind of 3D application written in just CSS with some HTML because of some of the transformation vector style process involved. So you can get quite crazy with CSS, but otherwise it is just a set of rules that we apply to HTML.
Nice. I do have another one that's just come in that I think a lot of people would benefit from. Is it normal to be confused?
Yeah, absolutely. For a couple of reasons. One, remember this session is mostly about giving you a recording so you can come back and look at and take it slowly in your own time. And so you can look at each of these sections and follow along at your own pace. We're trying to make sure we cover the main things you need to be able to have a frame of reference to when we talk about tic-tac-toe and Space Invaders. But if you want to try and follow along, definitely have a look back through this recording and use the reference code that you'll have to be able to do some more work. But the main way to program is to program. So we spent about 6 months going through on the course here, going through all parts of the technical stack, so people come out of it with some confidence, with lots of projects and a lot of programming under their belts. Because again, as I said, the main way to learn how to program is to write code, is to program. So if you feel like you're confused, that's absolutely okay. It's absolutely normal. It's been an hour and a half of probably your first experience of this. And the main thing is just to practice.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ed.
Yeah, no worries. Cool. Okay, so let's have a look at some layouts and how we put different things on the page, and then we're going to wrap up. So this should take about 5 minutes, and then I'm going to ask Patrick to close things up. So I have an HTML page here. I'm going to open up in my browser. Open up. And I've got 3 areas: the blue area, the yellow area, and the red area. And what I want is to have them side by side, not down the page. I've got my little duck, I've got some filler text, I've got a little smiley face. And what I want to do is organize them in columns, not down the page. So the way that we're going to do this is by using CSS to tell me that we're going to lay content out on a grid. And most websites use some kind of grid format to be able to put content in. So as we saw on the bbc.co.uk website, there's clearly a main column where we put information, and within that main column, we've got different areas where you can lay content out. Being familiar with some of the typical layouts and be able to build to a layout is what we concentrate on for a few weeks here on the course. So I've got my duck image, I've got my filler text, I've got my emoji down here. What I want to do is create a grid and then tell each of those areas to be a certain part of that grid. I want to be able to say duck be on the left, filler text be in the middle, and my smiley face be on the right. So the way that I'm going to do this using CSS is, first of all, to target this containing element called div with a class container, which has these other three elements nested inside of it. And I'm going to target it using the class selector container. And I'm going to say, please display as a grid. And please lay the content out in some kind of template that I can insert things into. So I use grid template property. Now, this template property is I'm going to take a number of values. The first one is the different sections. So I want on the left-hand side the duck. I'm going to put in the main section in the middle, and on the right is going to be my smiley. I'm just giving names to the sections that I want. I'm going to say that I want the height of the row just automatically adjust the content. And I want each of the three columns to be a certain width. Let's say I'm going to have a ratio of 1, 2, and 1. All right, so the middle column is going to be bigger, double as big as the left and right columns. So we're going to use fractions as a way to represent that: 1 fraction, 2 fraction, and then 1 fraction. That's it. I know this is probably quite specific, but we're not going to talk about it that much. It's a grid template property that takes in the 3 different areas that you want to put content into. You specify the row height and then the columns. And we'll see this again when you come back to tic-tac-toe, and then and again in Space Invaders. If I give these names to the areas, I've got to tell each of my elements on the page where to fit into it. So the left-hand side is going to be the duck element. So I say, please take up the space of the grid called duck. Please take up the main section where it's called main. And please, for the right-hand side, please take up the grid area called smiley. So these ones always have to match. And then the left-hand side targets the element that you want. And that puts content into 3 columns: left, middle, and right. And we can add a little bit of space in between the columns using the gap property. Let's say gap is 10 pixels. And we can see that it's pushed a little bit of space in between them. And I need to make sure I close that little semicolon. And we could do a few more things here to push some space around, but that's pretty much all we need to do for organizing things into grid. Have an element outside of the ones that you're going to try and put into columns, give it display grid, tell it what is the pattern to apply, and then put the elements into the right place. So this is like the control up here to say how I'm going to specify the template, and then you put the elements into it. And so you can have as many different widths of columns as you want, multiple rows, and you organize them all accordingly to this template up here. This is like the source of truth for how the template is going to look. And that's about it for the sessions that we're going to do today. We've gone through a lot, gone through the intro to HTML and CSS, looking at elements on the page, how do we target them using CSS, and then playing around with different kinds of rules. How do we change the width and height? How do we change text? How do we change colors? How do we add images? How do we change images? And to the point here where we come down to laying content out on a grid. So the best way to go forward is to practice, watch back this recording, have some fun with it, take it slowly from the beginning, play around with the reference code, load this up into your browser, and just enjoy having fun writing some web pages. And So that's it from me. I'm going to head back to Patrick. Tomorrow, we're going to do an introduction to JavaScript and set us up for being able to build tic-tac-toe on Wednesday. Patrick.
Thank you so much. That was super informative. Thank you for running through HTML and CSS, and my brain feels like it's going to explode, as I'm sure most people on this call does too. Nathan, also thank you so much for fielding so many questions, and also thank you to everyone, first of all, for sticking around. We really hope you've enjoyed the session and taken a lot away from it. Thank you for all your questions as well. We're sorry that we didn't get through to all of them. There must have been 300-400 questions asked in there. So hopefully we got the majority of the key topics answered. A few things just to wrap up then. First of all, many questions about lesson recordings. Yes, this lesson has been recorded. Yes, we will be sharing the recording. The plan is to upload that to our YouTube page, and we'll be sending around an email tomorrow when that's ready for you. So if you keep checking in on our YouTube page, you'll be able to see the lesson recording, watch that back in preparation for tomorrow's lesson, but also just to kind of recap anything that you missed if it went a little bit too fast. Second thing, we have to say a big thank you for having so many of us that we actually broke our Zoom limit of maximum participants. So apologies to everyone who's had a bit of trouble joining at the start, and thank you to everyone who's also joining on Discord. Thank you for your patience and for kind of flexibility there with being able to join at the start, and hope you didn't miss too much. The third thing, how do you register your attendance? In the chat, I will repost this again. This is the link for today's session. That link is going to change every day, so please don't fill this in tomorrow. You'll have to fill this one in today. That's the link to register for today's session. For people on Discord, it's also been posted, and I think it's been pinned in the general channel, but let me just also post it again now. It's there. So yeah, please fill that in. And then finally, we're back tomorrow at 5 o'clock for intro to JavaScript with Nathan. Ed will be taking the reins on the Q&A, and Nathan will be taking the reins on the presentation.
Patrick, nobody can see the links that are being posted in the chat.
No one can see the links. Me to host and panelists. Oh yeah, that would be why. Oh, I'm not allowed to share. Ed, would you mind sharing that?
Yeah, absolutely. I will.
Apologies, everyone. I had shared that about an hour ago, but obviously just to me and Ed and Nathan, which is not exactly very useful. People can see that now, hopefully.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, we'll be back at 5 o'clock tomorrow on the same Zoom link as well. So you'll just be back on this same Zoom link. And we're super excited about it. Really looking forward to it. Get a good night's sleep, rest your brain, eat some omega-3. And we'll be looking forward to going again tomorrow. Thanks, Ed, again. Thanks, Nathan, again.
Thanks for hanging out with us. It was lovely to be there with everyone, and see you tomorrow.
Woo. Have a good evening, everyone. Bye.